Okay, hi, welcome back to this episode of Chatting With, and today I have Daniel Ruff joining me. Daniel is a new lecturer at the computing department. Daniel is currently in Dublin, which is a story in itself, which I'm sure you'll tell us. So Daniel, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
Sure, yeah. Well, you kind of covered the basics. I'm Daniel Ruff. I'm the new lecturer at Dundee, although I haven't actually done any proper lecturing yet. So the title seems a bit sort of out of place. But yeah, so I'll be joining Dundee physically, hopefully, in the next couple of months. But yeah, currently stuck in Dublin because that's where I was doing my postdoc before I got the stint in Dundee. So I've been here for about a year now. And but yeah, looking forward to moving back to Scotland, I guess.
Yeah, and so the good thing is that you're from Dundee, right? Or the area.
Basically, yeah. I mean, I was in Dundee for a few years before that. And then, I was in St Andrews from like 2009 onwards. So I know the area fairly well, I think. I like Dundee. I know what to expect.
So what do you think in Dundee is better than in Dublin?
Okay, this is what I've got to say, isn't it? Oh God, you put me on the spot. I don't want to put Dublin down or anything. It's fine, but it's bloody expensive here for a start. That's one thing. But in terms of the actual university itself, I suppose, I don't know. I like the Scottish education system. I sort of like the structure of it. I like the familiarity of Dundee more than anything. I mean, Dublin's a bit too big for me, if I'm honest.
Oh, okay. And Dundee has Clark's Bakery, so.
Oh yeah.
For the university community, it's a big plus, I guess.
Okay,
so why did you start out in computing? Was that always your planned career? Like, what was it that kind of drove you down that path to start off with, do you think?
Oh, yeah. Well, I think, yeah, it's always been something that I was kind of keen on, I suppose. Even when I was like really young, like 4 or 5 years old, I loved Game Boy or my Super Nintendo or whatever when I was younger. I've kind of been, I was always quite an indoorsy kind of kid anyway, so I tended to spend my time with either like books or games consoles or whatever rather than actually being outside. So it's something that's always interested me since I've been away. And then as I got older and went to high school, and then we had actual computing as a course, and I really enjoyed that. I enjoyed programming, and I thought it was really cool that you could actually get paid to do programming.
True.
Yeah. And as I, so I decided that was kind of what I wanted to do at uni. That was the path I wanted to go down, because I thought this is kind of like for me. And so yeah, did computer science in my undergraduate. And I suppose it was exactly what I expected. I mean, because having done computing in high school, it's very different than when you go into university, and suddenly there's a load of different things you have to learn, and you're not just learning programming, but you're learning about there's some of the nuts and bolts of the architecture, and then some of the very low level assembly stuff, and it was a lot to get used to, but it's still something that I'm glad I did, and has kind of brought me to where I am now, I suppose.
Yeah, so unlike me, you're a real computing person. Like,
I'm not a real. No, I'm not. I've heard somebody say that human computer interaction is not real computer science, and I was kind of offended by that. But
yeah, someone told me it was a pseudoscience once. It's kind of sad.
That's just bloody rude, isn't it? I mean,
like, it was in the same conversation as like, oh, this is ridiculous, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and this doesn't work, and I'm like, well, if only there was a science that could solve that for you, who knows?
I know it's mad. Like I always see HCI as like if you've got the Venn diagram, right? You've got computer science here, and then you kind of got
Yeah.
social science here, and then you've got psychology here, and we're somewhere in the middle.
Yeah, and it's nice because what I think is interesting though is that a lot of people see one aspect of computing science and decide that's what it is.
Mm-hmm.
So a lot of people see, oh, these people do accessibility, so that must be HCI. These people do designing for VR systems, that must be HCI. I think because each university has a kind of specialism, I think that's the challenge people have to overcome it, to realize that it does have all of these parts.
Oh yeah, I mean,
But it means people come from all these different backgrounds too. So I think it's much more diverse than maybe some other areas of computing science are.
oh for sure. And I think like our conferences, even like the Chi conference, it brings in people from so many different backgrounds. You know, people that have never, never formally studied computer science. I mean, human computer interaction is for them. I mean, when I was lecturing at Maynooth University last semester, and their HCI module was within the sort of media studies department because it was
Okay.
towards helping students understand sort of like website design and user interface design for just communicating with people. And so yeah, people with no formal computer science background, and there was a bit of a mixed bag of students there. And that's what I like about HCI, is it is kind of it's very broad. I mean, there's so much that comes under that umbrella, I think.
Yeah, it's nice. So what are you working on right now? What's the topic that you're interested in?
Right. So the main topic again is kind of a bit of an umbrella topic as well. It's what's generally called end user development. And so, like, end user development is the formal definition is like methods, tools, techniques to allow people, regardless of programming experience, to tailor or create or modify their own software. So it's kind of putting programming into the hands of who aren't necessarily professional programmers. And so that's the sort of broad topic, I suppose.
So what sort of person would that be then? What sort of person would be creating programs as an end user developer?
Well, that's the interesting thing, because it can be anyone. I mean, end user development can be applied to any sort of person that might want to tweak their software in a way that works for them. I mean, end user development, you'll know, we were talking about this a bit earlier before we started, like Scratch, for example. So that's kind of like end user development. That's sort of like allowing people with no programming experience to learn programming concepts, sort of for its own sake, with the goal of then graduating to actually learn more formal programming languages. But then there's end user development for people that never want to learn programming, that never want to write a line of code, but just want to, tweak their software somehow to give it a customization, to add something new to it that it doesn't already have, to help them accomplish their goals.
Like my initial thought is like smart homes and programming my Hue bulb to do things and using if this then that. For a lot of people, they don't know what if this then that actually means. They just know it in terms of the English lexicon definition, that if this situation occurs, turn the lights on, right?
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, if this then that is a great example of sort of the introductory level of end user development, because it communicates something like event condition action programming or trigger action programming in a way that is intuitive, like that makes sense to people. You say, oh, right, if this happens, then that happens. I think that's a really powerful metaphor, and you can do so much with it just by saying, if this condition, then this action. And you can chain conditions together and make more complex things, but the fundamental if this, then that sort of structure is something that is accessible to to many people, whether they're tech enthusiasts or not, I think.
Yeah, so what sort of stuff have you done in that area then, in user development stuff?
Right, so well, my whole PhD was on end user development for pretty much psychology researchers, so like social psychology researchers who, want to kind of collect information from their participants as they go about their everyday lives, so you might want to bring your participant into the lab and, ask them how they've been feeling or what they've been doing over the past few days. And that's going to be subject to all sorts of biases, right? So people aren't going to necessarily remember how they were feeling at 5 o'clock on the Thursday afternoon. And so one way around this is with something called experience sampling. And experience sampling is basically just people completing surveys throughout their day at just specified times or at random times. And it asks them how they're feeling or what they're doing right now. And so it's got no bias. And so a great way to do that is with a smartphone app, right?
Yeah.
A smartphone app that sends you a survey like every couple of hours, and you can just complete it on the smartphone and have it carrying around with you so that you can complete these surveys as they come in. And so there are applications to do this, but they're not easy to develop. They'll require a professional programmer, or there are commercial tools available, but they can be really expensive and proprietary. And so my PhD was allowing these psychology researchers to kind of develop these apps themselves to tweak what the surveys will say and when they'll come in and what kind of data they want to collect. And so that was on the end user development side of people who don't want to actually learn how to program necessarily, but just want to get stuff done.
Yeah, so it's interesting that you say that, because probably around the time that you were working on that, I was doing like an experience sampling study, or rather Gareth was doing one. So Gareth Tigwell, who's now at RIT, did his PhD at Dundee, and he had an experience sampling study looking at people who had situational visual impairments. So it's sunny and I can't read my phone. I was on the bus, and so I couldn't kind of see because it was moving so much, or that sort of thing. And we basically, Gareth set that up using Google. So we set up like automated Google emails to people to remind them to go with a link just basically to a form that said, fill this form if you have something. And he would kind of send a reminder in the morning, in the evening, and Google shut him down because he was sending too many automated emails. They thought he was a spam bot.
Oh God, yeah,
So
of course.
halfway through the study, he had to like create this all again and like redo stuff. And so it like shut out access to like survey results and that sort of thing, because it was all using the same Google account. So you had so much work to do with Google to get access. And of course, with Google, you never speak to a person, right? It's always a chatbot or an email or something. So yeah, you had such a nightmare trying to get all that stuff back, which he did, and this survey finished. But yeah, if we had something that we could just really simply use to gather that information, and we didn't because it was expensive and we had no money to pay for it, so we decided to make our own with Google. But if we'd had that, how much more simple our life would have been in terms of gathering that situational information from people.
Oh no, and your solution was just over the Tay Bridge in St Andrews with me.
I know, we missed it. Oh well.
You missed the boat.
We learned a lot about the inner workings of Google instead, so it's cool.
Well, that's valuable knowledge in and of itself. But I suppose it would have been very much sort of research software at that time, and it probably wasn't very stable anyway. So I'm not sure if I would have trusted myself to give it to you in that sort of state. But it's ready now. I mean, if you want to do any experience sampling,
people can do it. So what sort of status is it in now? Is it in an app or a web interface or what?
Yeah, so it comes in two parts. And so you've kind of got the Android app, that actually sends out the surveys and lets you complete them and lets you potentially send anonymous feedback to the researcher.
Yeah.
Then to actually tailor what the app does, to tailor what the surveys are, when they get sent, under what conditions, etc. There is a sort of visual programming environment. So when I was mentioning Scratch earlier, that's the paramount example of a blocks-based programming environment where you drag and drop these graphical blocks together to make your programs. And so my software is called Jeeves. It's an acronym for something I can now not remember, but Jeeves is like a visual programming environment that runs on your desktop. It runs on Windows and on Mac, but it is a native application rather than a web application, and it lets you sort of tailor that functionality.
Yeah, nice. So people can just go and get it. It's free to download and try.
Yeah, I mean, shameless self-promotion here, isn't it? But you can go too. It's it's available from my website, like danielruff.net. It's called Jeeves, and again, it's still research software, so it's still not foolproof. But I'm always happy to help anyone that wants to use it. Basically, I mean, I'm all for open research and open science and things.
Yeah. So have you got plans to use it again, or to like expand it or add to it?
Yeah, I mean, so I've got a couple of people kind of using it just now for their own research studies. And so they always come back to me and give me feedback and say, oh, it would be nice if we had this, or it would be nice if we had that. So it's kind of like a continuously evolving system in response to people's needs. And that's the kind of beauty of it. That's what we call in the end user development lingo, it's what's called meta design. It's like designing for designers. And so the developers, the sort of psychology researchers can do their own tweaking and tailoring and customizing. But if they need something a bit more complex that requires programming, they sort of send it up the chain to what's called the meta designers, who can then sort of tweak the environment that these developers use so that they can then do further modifications. And so there's sort of two levels of design going on. It's an example of that. It's an example of a sort of meta design environment where I'm at the top sort of designing the blocks that researchers can then, stick together in various ways to make what they want to make.
Yeah, and I think it's so interesting as a meta designer to try and predict what people want. Like that must be really hard because, I mean, this is why HCI and user experience exists, right? Because you can't predict what people want.
Yeah, exactly.
Has anyone ever asked you for anything that you've kind of gone, what, really? Anything unexpected? Or was it all kind of fairly standard stuff?
I think in general it was, when they justified it and it was like, oh yeah, okay, that makes sense now. I mean, there was some very bespoke stuff to particular studies that it was like, okay, I'll make this feature for you, but then, probably nobody else will want to use that.
Yeah.
So that's fine as well. It means that, it's continuously evolving, but it can kind of evolve in different threads as well, so it doesn't have to be a one-size-fits-all piece of software. It can be a piece of software that has features tailored to the individual that wants to use it. But nothing too extreme. I mean, nothing privacy invasive or anything like that, because that's something you got to watch for as well. Of course, it's like you don't want to be collecting data from people without their permission. You can't be.
Yeah, and I think especially when it's an ethical concern, like a research ethical concern rather than it's an industry piece of software, that just becomes a really different ballgame in terms of how you remove that, how do you only allow access to some things, how do you check what that app has permission to access and all that sort of stuff. So
yeah, and that makes it kind of interesting from my, when I'm putting the app on the Google Play Store or anything, for example, and it's you know, you got to sign the ethical declarations and such like, and they say, right, you won't be collecting data from people without their permission. It's like, well, you know, I won't, but the researcher who is using this might.
Yes.
No, so
Can they?
Well, no. I mean, they can collect things like location information or Bluetooth information, but you know, they have to explicitly ask permission.
And I mean, you've got no control over whether or not they're asking for extraneous data or whether that data is immediately valuable for the research, right? Exactly. You could just collect location data for the fun of it, but it's never part of your research. And then you're in that position where you've got data that you didn't collect for the purpose you were supposed to.
Exactly, yeah. So, I mean, researchers are free to go off and use it to collect excessive amounts of data if their, you know, participants are willing to provide it. And so that is one of the challenges, is creating an environment that ensures that researchers can do no harm, right? So even now you can create an application that prompts users 1,000 times a day if you want to, which is going to cause all sorts of problems. And it's like, how do we anticipate that? How do we make sure? How do we warn them in advance that, you know, I wouldn't do this if I were you?
Yeah. Well, it's funny, that's the reason I don't wear an Apple Watch anymore. Yeah. I was being prompted like 1,000 times a day with notifications on my wrist, and I just got so overwhelmed and tired of it that I took it off and never put it back on.
Oh my God.
Every single message, every single news alert, every single everything was just like, hey, bzz, bzz, bzz. Oh, it was so frustrating. And I went down, like, I mean, I was like, okay, I'm going to shut off the news. Now I'm going to shut off text messages. Now I'm going to shut off phone calls. And after a week, it was just a watch. There was nothing smart about it. So yeah, I feel for those people that are getting the triggers, you know, many, many times a day.
Oh yeah, I mean, that's a major thing about experience sampling as well. It's like, it's a pain in the arse sometimes to, you know, even if you're only being prompted a few times a day, it's like, oh God, this again. But, and so
it's easy to start off with good intentions as well. So like, I started off with the COVID tracker, where it was like, ping up every day and say like, report that you're feeling well or that you've got symptoms or whatever. So for the first couple of weeks of lockdown, I was like so particular, like, yes, I'm feeling fine. And then eventually it was like, but nothing's changed, like, just ignore it. But of course, for the researchers, the fact that nothing changed is an important thing to know. But from the user participant point of view, I was kind of like, no, I don't have the headspace for that bit today, so I'll skip today. And then you skip 2 days, and then suddenly it's a habit to skip rather than a habit to report.
Yep, and you're off the wagon. Yep.
And that's the end. Yeah, so I mean, go on.
No, I was just going to say, that's the thing about experience sampling as well. It's like, how do we motivate people to kind of keep going? And I wanted to kind of incorporate those kind of features into Jeeves to say, you know, if participants haven't completed a survey, then, you know, send them some sort of motivational prompts. And then you get into like behavior
of
territory.
I think what we did was that if someone hadn't sent something, we would send something in the evening, or like we'd send it in the evening and say, oh, if you remember something from today, maybe you didn't have time or it wasn't safe for you to do it, tell us now. But again, that becomes an evening habit of receiving and then ignoring the email sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of inevitable that people will drop off and say, you know what, I don't have time for this anymore.
Yeah.
There are lots of ways to incentivize people, and unfortunately, the best one is usually money, I think.
Yes. I've seen a lot of studies where you get like money per week of participation, and it stops people dropping off, which is quite nice. But then how does that influence what the participant does, right? Is the participant just doing it to keep getting the money and just telling you a random thing? Or is it as truly honest as it was 2 weeks ago? Because that drop off is just so short.
Yeah, I know. I like to have faith in people, but you know, yeah, some people will just buzz through the surveys just, you know, to get a bit of cash.
Yeah.
That's the
Which
problem
is
with things like
you get with
mechanical turk.
all participant kind of methods is you get people who just burn through for the money.
Oh yeah, I mean that's the main problem with crowdsourcing and mechanical turk and things like that, isn't it? You know.
Yeah, it's just random selections in the survey to get your 2 cents or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So I've got a few questions that I want to finish up with, which I'm kind of asking everyone, I think.
Yep.
So what do you think is kind of the next big thing to come for computing people? And like, what are you most excited for that's new that could come and we could use or adapt in some way?
That is a good question. It's a good question for me because I am terrible at predicting the future and terrible at predicting what is going to be the next big thing. And
This could be the day it works out.
this could be it. You know, we have recorded in history that I will predict flying cars. I mean, flying cars would be cool if not terribly dangerous. But I think that's true of everything. I mean, for a long time, we thought, you know, ubiquitous computing was going to be the thing. So, you know, in the early 1990s, there was this vision that computers would be, well, the phrase was weaved into the fabric of everyday life, right? And to some extent that is true, but on the other hand, you know, we're very much still attached to our personal devices, right? So our technology is still very much present. It's there. We're actively engaged with it. And, you know, people are getting like RFID chips tattooed into their hands and things like that. But I think we're still a long way off the Ubicom vision. So I tend to be skeptical about things like self-driving cars, for example, or you know, the possibility that there will be what you call strong artificial intelligence, right? That, you know, machines will actually learn and empathize with us. So I don't really know. I'm gonna what am I gonna say? I'm not gonna say flying cars. That's silly. But maybe the future is, maybe we are moving back towards that sort of Ubicom vision where, you know, we have things like our smartphones, we still have our personal devices, but I think we're seeing a lot more sort of ambient technology being incorporated into our lives as well. I mean, smart homes, as you were mentioning earlier, they're becoming a lot more affordable. And, you know, if you have a Google Home or an Amazon Echo or something like that, you know, you can do a lot just with the power of your voice. And actually, that's something that I will say is the future. Voice is the future.
Voice input is the future.
Yeah. It is. I mean, speech recognition has gotten so much better over the past few years, right? From what it was. Yeah. It's like, you know, we've got loads of people at Google and Amazon working on sort of machine learning technologies to make speech recognition to the point that we can just sort of automatically generate subtitles and such like, which is hugely powerful, not just for convenience and smart homes and things like that, but also for accessibility, right?
Yep.
I mean, good speech recognition means that we can generate these subtitles on the fly, and it opens up a whole new channel to people who are hard of hearing, for example.
Yeah, I've been trying out so many of these captioning systems recently, and for live captioning, like I'd say Google is definitely the most effective for me, like in terms of like getting stuff. But then they have a big back catalog of all the Google Homes and stuff. So yeah, voice. I'll take voice. Okay, so so we're going to hopefully see you in Dundee, get interacting with students soon. So if you've got one bit of advice for students, kind of maybe from your own experiences or things you've seen and heard, what would that bit of advice be?
Right. So my bit of advice would be, you know, as I work through my undergraduate and my PhD and my postdoc, and even now, right, I tend to compare myself to other people, and say, you know, oh God, he's 3 years younger than me and he's got this many papers, or, you know, he got that grade, why didn't I get that grade?
Yeah.
main piece of advice, if I could give one piece of advice, is to not compare yourself to others. And so in the sort of academic world, we have, you know, a well-known thing called imposter syndrome, where you feel like you don't belong. You feel like everyone else has their head screwed on and you don't. You feel like everyone else has it together. I don't belong here. I'm not good enough for this place. And it's a horrible feeling, and it's never true. It's never the case.
Yeah.
Everyone's always struggling with their own individual things, and we're all on our own different paths, right? So,
Yeah.
you know, there are all sorts of things that can get in the way of us achieving a certain goal or a certain objective. And, you know, it's naturally, some people have a natural talent for things. Some people have the opportunities to do things that other people don't have. We're all on our own paths, and that is my main advice, is that, you know, you're on your own path, right? So don't worry about what anyone else is doing. Just do the best that you can. And
yeah, which I think is so important to consider, especially if you're an undergraduate student, because you are doing modules of study and all sorts of different stuff. And, you know, it's really hard to be good at them all. You know, like there's something that you're interested in and you'll find it. But yeah, just be you, I think, is great. Incidentally, have you ever seen the Google Talk by Frank Abagnale? It's the guy that, you know, the Catch Me If You Can film was based on.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, so like Leonardo DiCaprio played Frank Abagnale, and he gave a talk at Google. And one of the talks at Google, so like, I mean, think how cool you think someone is if they're like a Google engineer, right? Like, oh, I work for Google. And everyone's like, oh my God, they work for Google. The question they asked him was like, I have imposter syndrome. How do you cope with imposter syndrome when you went into all of these environments as an imposter? Like, so cool. And his answer was that I never went in with expectation. I always just went in to kind of see what would happen. And then I got a new bit of information, and that led me to the new thing, and that led me to the new thing. And imposter syndrome is a symptom of thinking too far ahead, which I thought was a really interesting take on the whole thing.
Goodness me. And to think, you know, that, yeah, even Google engineers are, you know, have imposter syndrome. I know, like, really senior academics that still feel like they've somehow punched their way into their role, despite all evidence to the contrary. And so it's...
Exactly. But everybody has imposter syndrome at some point of the day, the week, the month. I think it's way more common than people think it is. Yeah, cool. So we shall wrap up there. We'll put this on YouTube, and I guess people can contact you to chat about imposter syndrome from now on. Yay.
I'm not sure if I'm the go-to guy for that, but I'm always happy to talk about these sort of things. I think it's really important to address.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you very much for coming on, and I shall see you again soon.
Thanks, Rachel.